The FNAF Ruined DLC has officially dropped, revealing a ton of security breach secrets from a second Glamrock Freddy, new secret and undiscovered endings, unreleased characters, and so much more. Like the video if you end up finding something new here, but let's get right into it. So like we said yesterday, Five Nights at Freddy's Ruined DLC just dropped, and it features a brand new character named Cassie exploring the Pizza Place, left in Newcomb Ruin after Gregory is supposedly stuck and is begging for help. The only problem is that while doing this, she runs into a ton of different obstacles, from relatively basic puzzles to full-blown new enemies like this glitchy rabbit that kind of reminds me of Glitch Trap. However, in this video, I wanted to focus on a ton of the mini secrets and unreleased content that was put into the game, starting with the first one being the multiple and unreleased endings. So Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, as we know, on its own had a ton of different endings, and this new Ruined DLC actually has given us 3 new ones. The first one being the basic one, where we find out that Gregory talking to us throughout the entire game is actually a brand new character named the Mimic, before the real Gregory betrays us and kills us. A second one that simply cuts to a screen of Gregory out on the hill eating ice cream. I'm sure I'm missing the context of this one, but I don't really know what it means. And then there's a third one that actually involves going in and tricking the Mimic into falling into the scooping room hidden below Security Breach, which is super reminiscent to what we actually saw in Sister Location, where we were the ones getting scooped. However, this time it's obviously the Mimic himself, which I guess would be the best of all the endings. However, what's very interesting is that there's actually been some rumors that there's more than just 3 endings, or at least there used to be. Especially since if you look in the files, there's actually an ending that is just titled the Brazil ending. And while nothing conclusive was really found inside of it, later in this video we talk about other scrapped animatronics and whatnot that could have been in this ending. Or maybe it could just be a big joke because, I mean, it's called the Brazil ending. But speaking of the brand new endings for Security Breach, while this DLC seemed to be the only expansion to the game, it actually seems like there's a lot more unfinished business with the Pizza Plex itself. Because like I said, no matter which of the endings you get in this new DLC, you may actually notice that there really isn't a way to win the game. And while there wasn't really much of a way to win the base game either, at least there was the 3-star ending or the blob ending that showed what happened with the Pizza Plex. While in this version of the game, all we really know is that we could either discover the Mimic and kill him, or escape the Mimic and have Gregory kill us. They both are incredibly massive cliffhangers, and all they really prove to us outside of being massive surprises is that Gregory is by far the worst character in the entirety of Security Breach, no doubt about it. Now, I don't know if this is potentially setting ourselves up for a second Security Breach game or DLC. I know the reception of this DLC has been absolutely amazing, so I wouldn't be shocked if they want to continue the story, but what makes these inconclusive endings actually really interesting is that as of right now, Steelwool is already working on another Five Nights at Freddy's project, being Help 1 and 2, assuming there's no other new games later. And the reason why this is interesting is because if you look at the Help 1 and 2 trailer, you might notice that the panel in the bottom right is actually the same panel that Cassie uses with the Faz wrench to activate things in the main game. And so with that being said, we could theorize either at the very least that we'll be using the Faz wrench inside of Help 1 in, or perhaps even deeper, this new Help 1 in game could actually be a continuation of Ruin's story. Because with how big of a cliffhanger this game was left on, people are already dying for brand new content for the story, so it would really suck to have to wait another couple years for another game or DLC that will maybe give us some more answers. However, I also think the developers wouldn't just put this little tease on the bottom here for nothing, and while it's definitely a bit of a stretch theory, I don't think it's outrageous to think that Steelwool could have had some deeper intentions by putting this Faz wrench area in here. However, moving on from the game's endings, there's actually also been a few different new character spottings and theories as well. As first off, for the very first time, we actually got to look at Glamrock Bonnie, albeit in a dead state. And in fact, we even got to explore Bonnie's area entirely in the game, where they show a lot of love to Freddy, which I found pretty cool. Plus, I've seen a lot of people asking questions about where's Vanessa, Vanny, Music Man, Burn Trap, and all these other important characters that never made an appearance in the Ruined DLC, despite all the endings having them as prominent figures. And while all these questions are very reasonable, a character I found really interesting that actually did show up is that if you go down the stairs when first starting the game, you can actually see that the Blob, for a very brief moment, ends up making his return, even just for a few frames. I completely missed it the first time I played it, but it adds some merit to the theory that this game takes place after the Blob's ending specifically. Speaking of characters though, there's also been an unreleased character added into the game, or at least the game files, and if you look through them, you can see this new model of some disgustingly creepy rabbit type figure. This creature, to be honest, is by far the scariest of all the Ruined characters, and it's not even in the game. But as of right now, I can't exactly tell who it could be. I can really only assume it's a a new character. And in fact, as we remember putting the pieces together, there was that fourth ending that doesn't exist outside of the game files. So my personal theory is that there was actually meant to be a fourth ending for Security Breach, and possibly a much more conclusive one, containing this creature that for some reason they chose to scrap, whether that be to build more tension for, like we said, another new title. Maybe there were time constraints, or maybe the story just changed, but most likely it'll just remain as some sort of a relic, at least for the time being. One final interesting thing I noticed with all the animatronics also is that in one of the biggest twists in the game, when Freddy comes out and randomly attacks us, this version of Freddy has no head and chases us without ever saying a word, not giving really any context to his character, which was a very weird and interesting touch, because why in the world would Freddy chase us? Especially since he could have told us that Gregory wasn't actually in the Pizzaplex and saved our lives. Well, what's really cool is that looking at the Freddy animatronics feet for a while, not like I do that normally, but at the bottom it says prototype, which is actually a feature only on this version of Freddy and isn't actually on Glamrock Freddy from the base game, which I actually believe is basically confirmation that there are most likely multiple versions of Freddy and therefore multiple versions of other animatronics around the Pizzaplex, specifically ones that are labeled as a prototype or a test. And the reason why he attacks us when he never attacked Gregory in the base game is because this is a completely different Freddy who shares haunted traits with the rest of the animatronics, and this actually opens a whole can of worms of potential theories, because this headless Freddy also still has a gift in his stomach from the beginning of the game, also suggesting that this is a completely different Freddy. However, the last thing I want to talk about with the Rune DLC today is where does this game take place in the timeline? And I don't mean like a map path 50 episode timeline, but rather simply which of the endings in Security Breach does this game pick up from? I've already mentioned the idea of the burn trap endings or other endings where the Pizzaplex ends up getting abandoned for obvious reasons. It seems like a case closed. However, people were quick to point out that on the big pile of newspapers at the beginning of the game, there was a newspaper specifically that said that the reason the Pizzaplex closed was because of a natural disaster earthquake and was under reconstruction, which we can see in the equipment outside. And this could either mean two things to me. For one, it means that everything we thought about Rune was wrong and it actually has nothing to do with Gregory, which would be a curveball like no other, or that this is being used as some sort of cover-up in the game to try and hide what actually happened in the Pizzaplex with Gregory and whatnot. But the only problem with that last theory is that it's not like you could just fake an earthquake or anything. This little piece of news right here basically confirms that the pizzeria closed around the time of an earthquake, and unless there's something I'm missing here, this almost seems to hint at the idea that the events of Ruin are actually unrelated or separate to the events that ended in the first game, regardless of the ending. I mean, it's an extremely interesting theory when you think about it, and it's not like this is some random piece of set dressing. We are meant to point this out, and at least as far as I know, they never make it abundantly clear which of the endings Ruin takes place off of, but this seems to reopen the table to every single one of them, from the good ones to the bad ones to the true ones. It seems like it could realistically be any of the few. Plus, going back to Freddy missing his head, with this new piece of info, we could also use this as potential evidence to suggest that the Princess Quest 3-star ending is the true ending, because Freddy, Gregory, and Vanessa actually survive the Pizzaplex and we don't see them in Ruin, but Freddy doesn't actually have his head. I mean, it wouldn't explain why his foot says prototype, and also they burned the building down in that ending, so I'm not exactly sure. But it seems blatantly clear that the developers are intentionally being super ambiguous with which endings this DLC could be based off. But as a personal FNAF lore casual, those who've read the books about the Mimic and the rest of the Pizzaplex, comment down below what you know. Subscribe if you want more Ruin content, and peace out, guys.